So every few years or so, I share a very, very personal experience in my life and how the Dharma had really helped me to move through it. And so I try to remember what was the last time that I had one of these big life movements, and I think it might have been when my sister Jane died back in 2018. How the Dharma really helped me to kind of prepare myself for her death, how to be with her as she was dying, and then to really get clear about who it was that was dying. And the grief didn't take so long to move through in a nice, clear, and easy sort of way. So I have another one that has come up, surprisingly, this week. So after the Taiwanese bhikshunis came and spent the beautiful week with us about the bodhicitta, I made a commitment, surprisingly for some reason on Mother's Day, that I would spend the next year really building more of my building blocks on how to generate bodhicitta. As much as I love their practices, I said, I have found my bailiwick this life. The 7-point cause and effect and equalizing, exchanging self and others are really where I can find my home on how to generate bodhicitta, at least contrive this life. So I made that commitment. And for Mother's Day, for whatever reason. And then on Wednesday, as I was looking through some of my memorabilia as we were doing this room move, I came upon a letter that I wrote to my father back in 1990 when I was 35 years old, and his response to me. And it was all about Mother. And it was basically, without getting into the letter, it was 4 pages long. It was quite intense. And my dad's letter was small, 2 pages long. It was very, very profound. So, and as a result of that, a whole bunch of memories flooded through on how a very, very difficult relationship with my parents in my life was brought through an extremely powerful healing process by a teaching that Venerable gave back in 2000, between 2008 and 2010, where she unpacked my training like rays of the sun. She came upon these 2 ways to generate bodhicitta. And the way in which she unpacked the 7-point cause and effect changed my entire perspective of what I consider to be a traumatic, difficult, painful, confusing childhood. So one of the things about these 2 types of bodhicitta, how to generate them, is that the equalizing, exchanging self and others. I mean, I get it. You know, the self-centered thought, I mean, it hits the nail on the head. The self-grasping ignorance is the mastermind and the henchman is the self-centered thought. All about that, about how to work with all of this in this life and to get ourselves squared away on what causes our misery. The taking and giving is just incredibly profound practice. But when it comes to the 7-point cause and effect and looking at all sentient beings as having been our mothers and looking at the mothers and the parents of this life, repaying the kindness, the love, the compassion, the great resolve, there was a whole lot more resistance from me. I could not get over the crevasse between seeing all sentient beings as having been my mother. I could do that. I could see that since beginningless time, they say in the Tibetan stories, that we have drank more milk from our mother's breast that could fill the 4 great oceans. And that, not only the mothers and the parents of this life, but until we become Buddhas and maybe the 8th ground where we can emanate or something, we're going to need a lot more mothering. And we're going to have a lot more mothers, whether they're going to be pretas, animals, or humans. We're going to be needing a lot more mothering. And that during the course of the future lives that we're going to have with them, they're going to be doing everything they can to protect our lives. They're going to feed us, care for us, protect us even at the cost of their very life. They're going to create a whole bunch of negative karma to protect us, ensure success and fame and fortune and wealth and whatever. And so I could wrap my mind around that conceptually, but to get into looking at the mothers of this life and to see their kindness, I had a huge amount of resistance. And partially, I'll tell the story of how that unfolds. So, and at the time I didn't know my karma, so I didn't know about why we get the parents we do, the throwing karma, the completing karma. But what I did as a result of my childhood, I carried around a lot of pain, I carried around a lot of confusion, anger, resentment, this intense sense of abandonment that became obstacles to me getting to step number 2, which was to see the kindness of my mother. So when Venerable unpacked this 7-point cause and effect during those teachings, she came from a very different perspective that totally changed everything for me. And what she did is that she unpacked it not from the perspective of us as the children, seeing the kindness of our parents, but from the parents' perspective. What kind of struggles raising a child? What type of joys? How did they raise us? How did they manage to do this in the middle of all these other things that they were juggling? And to turn the attention away from the self-absorbed child, I, me, my, and mine, and then the preteen, the teenager, the young adult, our relationships to our parents is a lot all about me. That she turned it totally around and looking at this from the perspective of our parents. So what I wanted to do, because from that moment on, and even to this day, and that letter brought it back up in full technicolor, is by looking at my parents' lives, I was able to totally change 180 degrees my view of my childhood. So that's what I wanted to share with you today. It's a very short version. It's a very complicated story, but I want to share Paul Nesbitt, Liz Wargo, and Jenny Gutowski. I had two moms. So Dad, Paul Nesbitt, he was an orphan. He was the child, three brothers. He was a child of a showgirl and a factory worker in Massachusetts. They were Canadian immigrants. They somehow disappeared somewhere in his young life to where he took up residence in a boarding school by Mrs. Bisbee, who he emptied the chamber pots of the teachers who rented the boarding rooms there. He went into the military as soon as he could and spent many, many years, Army, Navy, Air Force, Marines, anything to just find meaning in his life. Then I don't know how he got to New Jersey, but somewhere in the 1950s, he was in New Jersey, and he went to one of those USOs, which back in the old days, they were called United Service Organizations. And they were for either the vets or the guys coming home and the women coming home for leave to get them joined back in their community, get them joined back after serving. He had just come out of the Korean War. And at that place, my mom, Liz Wargo, was volunteering. So they met. She was from a Hungarian, she was the only child of a Hungarian immigrants my grandfather had stowed away on a cargo ship. And Grandma, Bertha, I don't know how she got here. She was a twin also. So they married 1951. And he was 41 or 42. My mother was 36 or 37. So they married quite late. This was his second marriage. So in 1952, Jane was born. They were living, I think, with my mom's mom and dad. Grandpa was Hungarian. He knew no English. And Grandma died somewhere, I think, in 1994. So Jane was 3. In 1955, their entire world turned upside down. My mom, at 41, had twins. It was a C-section, and extremely difficult. At that time, I think C-sections were probably major surgeries. And sometime after, a day or so after, she had a stroke. And before she could lose her speech, she made sure and had my dad promise that he would not let the children be separated from him. He would keep us all together. And a few days later, she died. So here he is, 47 years old, 2 newborns. They immediately put us into an orphanage for homeless girls. And during that time, the first month or so, I contracted dysentery, and they put me back in the hospital. I fought for my life for about 6 weeks. I went down to 3 pounds. So here's this 47-year-old widow, 2 newborns, one's in the hospital fighting for her life, a 3-year-old that's with Grandpa wondering where the heck did Mom go? She went to go have babies, and then Mom never came back. So and then to make it a little more interesting karmically for my dad, the state of New Jersey writes him and says, "No, Mr. Nesbitt, you have really some very difficult circumstances here. We're not quite sure you have the circumstances conducive to raising 2 newborn children and a 3-year-old, so we want you to consider putting them up for adoption." And so here he is, commuting from New Jersey to Manhattan, where he was the food manager for Barrett's. It was a very famous cafeteria back in the 50s where you had your food on these glass things where you opened up the case, there was a sandwich and potato salad and whatever. And on those commutes, he met Johanna Gutowski, who worked at the garment district. She came from a Polish family, a farming family in New Jersey, a very complicated, abusive family. Her father was an alcoholic. She was in the middle of a divorce from her alcoholic husband. She had 1 child who now had children of her own. It was in 1950 1953, 1955, it was right after we were born. She was just getting over her first grandchild in a car trip with her sister Tess. We're driving with her brand new grandchild who was 3 years old in a car, and back then they didn't have seatbelts. They were in a car accident where the child went through the windshield, died immediately, and Jenny sustained very life-sustaining back injury, which plagued her for the rest of her life. So just imagine the scenario. 47-year-old widow, 3 children that the state wants to set up for adoption. A woman who's got through a divorce from an alcoholic husband is working through the grief of her first grandchild, feeling that she was responsible for her death, commuting to work. So my dad somehow connects with Jenny and tells the story. And at that point, I see 2 human beings desperately trying to connect, trying to put the past aside, trying to pull the pieces of their lives together, trying to start a new chapter in their life. And Jenny agreed. And within 8 months that they met, they married. And my dad bought a house in Levittown, Pennsylvania. The GI Bill supported veterans with new homes for $9,990. So Jenny got moved in with 2 8-month-olds. I'd come out of the incubator. I managed a 3-year-old who was pissed as hell still because her mom was not this lady in the house. My dad commuting still until he could find a job closer to home. She's 51 years old. Her daughter, who is raising children the same age, is 32 years old. Okay, so this is life. And into that came and her chronic back pain. She had back surgery. My dad was 47, going into traveling salesmanship, competing with men half his age. I mean, they were trying to start life over at a later than middle age. And she was Sergeant Joyce effort on steroids with a little bit of a short fuse. And Dad was not home a lot because he was a traveling salesman. And you know what? They raised 3 really nice people. So that's the part that Venerable's teaching that night when she put us in the shoes of our parents, that helped me to see the kindness of my parents. Because what had happened is that over the course of my life, they didn't tell me that I had a birth mother till I was 15. They kept we had huge secrets in our family. So after that, I journeyed onto that fantasy of what it would have been like if Liz had lived. Would my life have been different? And of course, I imputed all the perfect qualities of a mother. And Jenny had all the worst qualities of a not mother. And I spent most of my life kind of compressed between the fantasy of the mother that never existed and what I perceived as the oppression of the mother that I had. And it kept me out of intimacy with the relationship. I was a nomad. I just could never settle down because I was so confused. And Dad was kind of in there somewhere writing me these letters about how wonderful I am and how strong I am and I'm going to make it through everything, which was totally true. So what I want to say now is that, Liz, she's just been a wonderful figment of my imagination. She had incredible karma to have an untimely death. Jenny, everything courageous, everything resiliency, her patience. She was a homemaker par excellence. There wasn't anything she couldn't cook, freeze, sew, repair. But she had wasn't soft and mushy on the inside. She wasn't affectionate, didn't know how to hug, didn't know how to support. But she put the food on the table. She made me our clothes. She got us into school. She made our lunches for 18 years. She showed her love in that way. And Dad brought home the money. He showed me how to garden. There were ways in which the love came in waves that I didn't recognize until that night when Venerable gave that teaching on the kindness of mother. And Dad kept his promise. And I was really angry at him after I found out. I was relieved that Jenny wasn't my mom, but then I was really pissed at him because they hadn't told us. But in the end, he always had a positive. He always wrote me notes of encouragement. We all cards and letters over the years. And so I can't help, after that night, ever since then, I have not been able to look at my parents' life without seeing their incredible kindness and how to repay it. I can't ever do that. And then going into warm-hearted love, to see Jenny Gutowski as lovable is a walk in the park. She was a character. And Sergeant Joyce's effort did not fall far from the tree. I mean, and the gardener did not fall far from the tree. My dad loved to garden. So the karma as it was, and then to extrapolate, okay, if this is just the parents of this life showing me this kindness, what does that mean for all the sentient beings that have ever been my mother? What have they done? What cost have they had to carry and bear to raise me, to bring me into my adulthood, to turn out to be a nice person? And that this letter was part of me trying to reconcile that. But because of Venerable's teaching, I was able to really reconcile that. And that I believe that that whole journey and what happened there in that family constellation was part of the substantial cause for me to seek the Dharma, to be able to somehow make peace with this confusion, this sense of abandonment, this loneliness, this search for healing and peace. It was definitely the substantial cause that got me here. So what I wanted to do was to just share my dad's response and to see this as not just him talking to Nancy, but talking to all of us who have had mothers since beginning of this time, and to remember them in the way in which he asked me to remember my mother. I could do this. My dear Nancy, no father has ever received, he was a great writer too, received a more beautiful Valentine's message from which I lovingly thank you. Truly, I am deeply touched that you have crossed over the threshold of pain and hurt. You accomplished an unbelievable task through the beauty of heart and mind combined with a deep, honest search within yourself to release the bonds which tormented you for so many years. Continue to press forward with your goals of life, strengthened by the assurance you now possess by the awareness of your mother's love. So this is where I'm saying, okay, think about all mother sentient beings, not just the mother of this life. Think of all the mothers of our past, think of all the mothers of our future, and their love and their kindness. Always keep the precious love of your mother in your mind and heart. Go to her when you are troubled. Thank her when you are filled with joy and peace, for she gave you the breath of life only to lose her own. So we have to remember that the mothers of all of our lives have gotten us through troubled times. They've given their lives. They have protected us. They have rejoiced in our triumphs. This is the way we've got to look at them. If we're going to generate bodhicitta, this is where we got to go. We can't go with all the little, they didn't make our lunches, and they didn't hug us enough, and they didn't take us to baseball games, they didn't do whatever. That's not the peace. The peace is that since beginningless time, they have kept us alive, protected us, nourished us, advocated for us, mentored for us. And it says, keep the faith, the guiding light will shine bright and long. So this really kind of had put me in a whole different relationship to the 7-point cause and effect. And I really, and I believe, and Venerable has said this, I want to confer with her, is that there's no way to generate bodhicitta. I even think with equalize and exchanging self and others, if you have not healed your relationship with your parents, whether they're alive or dead, if you have not made peace, either writing them a letter, visualizing them, talking to them, estranged, crazy, abusive, whatever, I don't think you'll ever be able to generate bodhicitta. On either side, because you can't get past equanimity and equalizing, exchanging self and others if you don't understand the kindness of your mother and father. So that is one of the things that came out of that teaching. It's from July 2008 to September 2010. Check them out. It's a profound teaching on the kindness of our mothers.